Deep within the labyrinthine corridors of the great palace, shadows move with more purpose than the people who cast them. In the year 988, the golden city of Constantinople is not a place of peace, but a gilded cage where every smile hides a cold intent. The Emperor Basil II knows that his throne is built on shifting sands, and his own kin are the ones digging the foundation out from under him. He needs a force that cannot be bought, a shield that does not understand the language of whispers, and a loyalty that is written in something more permanent than ink. Behind the heavy oak doors, the air is thick with the scent of incense and the unspoken threat of a sudden departure from this world. The Emperor sits alone, listening to the soft scrape of metal against stone from the hallway, a sound that would terrify any other man. But for him, it is the only thing that allows him to sleep. The threat comes from within. In the Byzantine court, a cup of wine is rarely just a drink, and a friendly hand on the shoulder often searches for the softest point between the ribs. The ruling elite are masters of the long game, weaving webs of influence that span generations. Basil II, later known as the Bulgar Slayer, realizes that his traditional guards are compromised by family ties and local ambitions. To them, the emperor is a figurehead to be managed or replaced when he no longer serves their interests. He looks toward the horizon, toward the cold and unforgiving north, where men are forged by ice and iron. He seeks the giants of the Rus, the Northmen, who see the world not in shades of political gray, but in the stark contrast of oaths kept or oaths broken. These are the men who will become the Varangian Guard, the ultimate insurance policy for an empire that is slowly consuming itself. They arrived not as conquerors, but as a gift of 6,000 warriors, tall and imposing, with hair like spun flax and eyes that mirrored the gray storms of the Baltic. To the refined citizens of Constantinople, these men were barbarians. Yet they were the only ones who could be trusted with the emperor's physical safety. The contrast was jarring. On one side, the most sophisticated civilization on earth, draped in silk and smelling of rare spices. On the other, warriors clad in heavy mail, carrying massive double-headed axes that looked as though they could split the world in two. This was the beginning of a strange and lethal symbiosis. The Northmen gained access to unimaginable wealth, while the emperor gained a wall of muscle that felt no pull toward Byzantine court intrigue. The great palace was a city within a city, a sprawling complex of marble halls, hidden passages, and silent gardens. For a Varangian, navigating this place was more dangerous than sailing through a gale. Every corner held a potential trap. They were the axe-bearing guards, standing motionless at the foot of the throne, their presence a silent warning to any official who thought of slipping a fast-acting substance into the imperial carafe. Their reputation grew into a legend of invincibility and terrifying stoicism. They did not speak the local tongue, which made them the perfect confidants for a ruler who could trust no one else. They heard the secrets of the empire, but lacked the means or the will to trade them. The language barrier was a fortress in itself, a wall of silence that kept the emperor's plans safe from the prying ears of the aristocracy. Life in the Guard was a peculiar form of isolation. They lived in their own quarters, maintained their own customs, and spoke their own language, creating a Nordic island in the heart of a Greek ocean. They were paid in gold, amounts that would make a man a king in his northern homeland. But the price was constant vigilance. The dark thriller of their existence was the reality that they were the only thing standing between the emperor and a dozen different factions who wanted him gone. At night, the halls of the palace echoed with the heavy, rhythmic thud of their boots, a sound that reassured the emperor but chilled the hearts of his rivals. It was a rhythmic reminder that the price of betrayal would be paid in a very physical and final manner. Every step taken by a Varangian was a message to the court. The rules of engagement had changed. The conflict wasn't just external, it was psychological. Imagine a warrior raised in the vast, open forests of Scandinavia or the sweeping steppes of the Rus, suddenly confined to a world of stone and protocol. The sensory transition must have been overwhelming. The heat of the Mediterranean sun, the overwhelming sweetness of the incense, and the constant, suffocating weight of being watched. Every Varangian knew that while they guarded the emperor, the court was watching them, looking for a weakness, a vice, or a moment of distraction. They were outsiders in the most exclusive club in the world, valued for their strength, but viewed with a mixture of awe and elitist disdain. This duality created a tension that never truly subsided. They were the necessary monsters, kept in golden chains to keep the human vipers at bay. As the years turned into decades, the Guard became more than just a security detail. They became a symbol of the emperor's absolute power. When the Varangians marched, the ground shook, and the populace knew that the will of the throne was being enforced. But within the ranks, a different kind of tension simmered. The wealth they accumulated was vast, leading to stories of hearth gold, so plentiful that a man could return home and buy an entire province. This sparked a different kind of danger: greed. The emperor had to ensure that his protectors remained satisfied, for a disgruntled Varangian was a force that no palace wall could contain. The relationship was a delicate balance of immense reward and the expectation of total self-sacrifice. It was a contract signed in gold and fulfilled in blood. There were nights when the palace felt like a tomb before its time. Rumors would swirl of a planned transition of power, of midnight meetings in the lower crypts. The Varangians would tighten their grip on their axe helves, their blue eyes scanning the darkness for the slight shimmer of a concealed blade. They were trained to notice the smallest deviations in routine. A servant who seemed too nervous, a door left unlatched that should be locked, a silence that lasted a second too long. In these moments, the thriller was not a matter of grand battles, but of micro-movements in the shadows. The survival of the most powerful empire on Earth depended on the intuition of a few hundred men from the north, who understood that in this city, a whisper could be more lethal than a war cry. One of the most famous figures to emerge from this dark environment was Harald Hardrada, a man who would eventually claim the throne of Norway. Before he was a king, he was a captain of the Varangian Guard, navigating the lethal politics of the Byzantine court with the same skill he used on the battlefield. His time in Constantinople was marked by daring exploits and a masterful understanding of when to use force and when to use gold. He witnessed the rise and fall of several emperors, learning the hard lesson that in the Golden City, power is as fleeting as the morning mist over the Bosphorus. His story highlights the transformative power of the Guard, how it took warriors and turned them into world-class strategists. Hardrada did not just survive the labyrinth, he mapped it, using the knowledge he gained to build his own legend across the European continent. The presence of the Varangians changed the very nature of Byzantine conflict. Because the emperor had an elite force that was personally loyal to him, the traditional power brokers had to change their tactics. Direct physical confrontation became nearly impossible against men who could cleave a horse in two. Instead, the darkness of the palace grew deeper, focusing on more subtle methods of removal: poisons, blackmail, and long-term political sabotage. This only increased the burden on the Guard. They had to be more than just warriors. They had to be investigators, wardens, and a constant psychological deterrent. They were the physical manifestation of the emperor's distrust of his own people. Every time a Varangian stood guard, he was a living accusation against the loyalty of the Byzantine nobility. But what happens when the empire itself begins to fray? As the Byzantine treasury struggled and the borders were pressured by new arrivals, the gold that fed the Varangian loyalty began to thin. The thriller shifts from a story of protection to a story of survival. The Guard found themselves involved in the very thing they were meant to prevent: the selection and removal of rulers. When the legal lines became blurred and the succession was in doubt, the men with the axes became the ultimate arbiters of legitimacy. There are accounts of the Guard entering the inner sanctums during times of extreme unrest, not to protect the occupant of the throne, but to ensure that the transition to the next ruler was handled with Nordic efficiency. The shield had become the sword, and the protectors had become the kingmakers. The atmosphere of Constantinople during these times was one of high-stakes tension. The city was a masterpiece of architecture and art, but underneath the gold leaf was a foundation of fear. The Varangians were the keepers of that fear. They were the ones who cleared the streets, who stood at the gates of the Hagia Sophia, and who ensured that the emperor's shadow was always accompanied by the glint of sharpened steel. Their loyalty was legendary, but it was a loyalty to the office of the emperor, not necessarily the man. As long as the protocols were followed and the gold flowed, the Guard was an unbreakable wall. But if the throne was vacated, their duty was to the new occupant, a cold reality that many deposed rulers discovered too late. They were the ultimate professionals in a world of amateurs and opportunists. The decline of the Guard mirrored the decline of the empire. The once pure Nordic composition began to change, with men from England joining the ranks after the Norman conquest. This introduced new tensions, new histories, and a shift in the unit's internal culture. The axe-bearers were still feared, but the mystical aura of the invincible Northmen began to fade as the empire's influence waned. The thriller elements of the story reached their peak during the various sieges of Constantinople. Here, the Guard was the last line of defense, fighting not just for an emperor, but for their own legendary status. They were the ones who stood on the walls when everyone else had fled, the last remnants of a world where an oath was worth more than a life. Their final stand was a grim testament to the heavy price of their service. There is a haunting quality to the legacy they left behind. In the great church of Hagia Sophia, if you look closely at the marble balustrades in the upper gallery, you can still see runes carved into the stone. They are the marks of bored Varangian guards, men who stood watch for hours in the silence of the holy place. They carved their names or simple phrases like "Havdan was here." It is a chillingly human touch in a story defined by cold steel and political darkness. It reminds us that these were real men, thousands of miles from home, living in a world of constant threat and alien luxury. They were the silent witnesses to the slow-motion collapse of a civilization, leaving their names on the very monuments they were sworn to protect. The story of the Varangian Guard is a reminder that power always requires a shield, and a shield is only as strong as the hand that holds it. In the dark corridors of the Byzantine Empire, that hand belonged to an outsider. The danger was constant, the conflict was eternal, and the resolution was often found in the swing of a heavy axe. They were the elite, the untrusted, trusted, and the foreign heartbeat of a dying empire. As the sun set on Constantinople for the final time, the echoes of the Northmen remained, a whisper of iron in a world of silk, a final testament to a time when loyalty was the most expensive commodity in the world. Their presence ensured that the light of the Roman East burned for centuries longer than it might have otherwise. The psychological toll of their service cannot be understated. To live as a Varangian was to exist in a state of permanent alienation. They were surrounded by beauty they did not understand, and by people who viewed them as little more than highly effective weapons. This isolation likely reinforced their bond to one another and to the emperor, who was their sole benefactor. In the end, they were a brotherhood of the displaced, unified by the shared weight of their heavy mail and the shared burden of their deadly secrets. Their story is not just one of military history, but of the human capacity to adapt to the most hostile and complex environments imaginable. Today, we look back at the Varangian Guard, not just as a military unit, but as a masterpiece of high-stakes management. The emperors of the East understood a fundamental truth. To survive in a den of vipers, you must bring in a bear. But the bear must be fed, and the bear must be respected. The thriller ends not with a final battle, but with the slow fading of the Guard into the mists of history, leaving behind only the runes in the marble and the legends of the tall men with axes who once held the fate of the world in their hands. The shadows of the great palace are empty now, but the story of the Varangians continues to serve as a dark, cautionary tale of what it takes to protect a crown in a world where everyone is a pretender. The legacy of these warriors is a bridge between the wild, expansive world of the North and the refined, insular world of the Mediterranean. It is a story of how necessity can forge the strangest alliances, and how the most brutal of tools can be used to preserve the most delicate of cultures. The Varangian Guard stood at the crossroads of history, their axes gleaming in the torchlight of a palace that saw more betrayal than almost any other place on earth. They were the silent guardians of a dream that was slowly turning into a nightmare, and their unwavering presence is the reason that dream lasted as long as it did. In the silence of the night, if one listens closely to the history of the Bosphorus, they might still hear the rhythmic thud of their boots against the marble floors.